The editor of Burden of Dreams, Maureen Gosling, Harriet Blank, post-production supervisor Anthony Matt, and sound engineer Nick Bird.
You sit here, Maureen.
Oh, okay.
This way,
Did everyone enjoy that? Anthony was telling me that this is the premiere. There was no festival premiere. You showed half the film in Paris at the Pompidou Center, but this is it. This weekend is the premiere. You guys are very lucky. I want to get to all of you, but I'll just kick things off. Maureen, you had already been working with Les Blank for about 6 or 7 years at this point. I think this was your 7th project with him, including Werner Herzog Eats His Shoe, which was just before this. So a little bit about how you met Les and how the two of you met Werner.
I graduated from University of Michigan in 1972 with a degree in social anthropology. And I had a love of film for quite a long time, but I didn't know anything about it. I didn't even know, in those days, it wasn't like a regular career that you would even think about having, especially for a woman. And so I didn't even think about it. I just was obsessed with going to, the new wave of all the European films that were going on. And I got excited when I visited a film class and learned that that there was an anthropological film festival going on. And I thought, oh, anthropology, film, that would be cool. So I met Les at this ethnographic film festival where he was showing Spend It All, Lightning Hopkins, and Blues According to Lightning Hopkins and A Well Spent Life. And I just thought his films were just so beautiful and different from anything I'd seen before. They were so poetic. And I had got a nerve, my nerve up and talked to him at a party, and about 9 months later I was working with him, and I thought I was going to just be his little assistant, and he would just kind of tell me what to do. And it turned out I was the sound recordist on these films, and so suddenly I was carrying around a 25-pound tape recorder and running after him. And in those days we were connected by a wire, a sync cable. And that Dry Wood and Hot Pepper was the first film we did together. And so at the beginning I did sound recording and just fell into it, and then was an assistant in the editing. By the end of the 70s, he had gradually started losing interest in editing, even though he'd been doing it for years, and let me sort of try my hand at it. And he liked what I was doing, and so I sort of had this transition of doing little bits here and there, and by the time we got to this film, this film and this other film, a short film, were the first 2 films I edited from scratch by myself, and so that was pretty exciting. Les had met Werner at the Pacific Film Archive in Berkeley. His really good friend, their mutual good friend, Tom Luddy, introduced them, thought they would like each other, and Werner's films would show at the Pacific Film Archive, and Tom Luddy would show Les's films. And they did like each other. They met each other, and they watched each other's films. And I was just rereading, we did a book that we hope to get on an ebook out of it at sometime soon, that we did that was journals of Les's and mine and Werner Herzog's letters to his investors. And in there, was a reference to Les had I asked Werner at a dinner when we were in Telluride Film Festival, said, Werner, it would really be great to do a making of sometime when you're doing a film. That would be really cool. And so I guess Werner kept that in the back of his mind, and when he came up with this idea for Fitzcarraldo, he said, hey Les, how would you like to do this film, the making of? And it was like, oh wow, do we really want to go to the jungle? What we know about this guy is that he jumps into cactuses and he swims with piranhas, and do we really want to do this?
And eats shoes.
And eats shoes, yes, and he's quite a character. But it was sort of like, okay, we get to go to the Amazon jungle. Les was very excited about that. And I was really intrigued by meeting the indigenous people. So we said yes, and the rest is history.
So just two quick questions for you then. Over Les's entire career, how many films did you work on with him? Do you know that? Do you have that number?
I think about 20. And
Always in the capacity of editing and co-directing, or?
I started out as an assistant and sound recordist,
Right.
and then gradually, I always, at certain points, still did some sound recording, but I really got into editing. I figured out that was really what I loved. And he never could quite give me co-director credit, but he said he was okay with co-filmmaker. And I actually liked that because it really showed that I was there from the beginning to the end of these films. And I feel like I did, when each film I did discuss with him what my credit should be, and so I'm mostly happy with the credits that we have in the films. They don't always get, in press and stuff, they don't always have the same credits, but for the most part, I was able to be satisfied with the credits he gave me, and on this one, I was a co-filmmaker and editor and sound recordist.
And from what Werner says towards the end of the film is, it was roughly for him a 4-year process to get Fitzcarraldo made. So, just for clarity's sake, when were you and Les invited to jump on board and do a making of? How far into the process?
When he was first starting to shoot in Northeast Peru, we were down there for a month, and so it must have been like 78, and it took him some time once he was kicked out of the Northeast Peru by the Rapadorunas to get the other, crew together and actors, and so I don't know if it was about, I can't remember exactly the time between when we were there the first time and then we went back for 2.5 months. So altogether we were there for 3.5 months between the two shoots.
Harry, you were, if your Wikipedia page is correct, you were a young adult when your father made Bird in Dreams.
Yeah, and unfortunately I wasn't invited to participate because I was in high school.
So you were very young.
As was my brother, who's here in the second row here, Beau Blank. We were just kids in high school, and we actually talked about it today. Do you recollect that we were ever invited to be part of this, and we really weren't?
Right.
So it's sad for me in retrospect because I would have loved to have been part of that.
Yeah.
The whole jungle thing and shooting and all that. I was a basketball player, so I could have handled the physical turmoil that they endured, which I've heard it from a lot of people, not just Les and Maureen, but Pacho, who worked on this film. He was telling me that how treacherous it was carrying the camera gear up the mountain.
Oh, yeah.
And he filmed that one shot where the film magazine case is being carried up the mountain by this guy, and you can see the mud squirting through his feet, and he's just trying to keep his balance. Those are the magazines. That thing's like 40 pounds.
Right. Sure.
And they're carrying up these slippery slopes. I mean, it's physical. It was a really physical thing.
Right. Well, that was probably a wise choice on your father's part to not invite two down.
Yeah.
But do you have recollections of him sharing stories about that? And I guess just in general, I'd love to know what it was like being raised by Les Blanc and having such a world of, that's a long conversation. I mean, you're exposed to so much through your father's passions and his work.
Yeah, ever since, I was born, basically Beau and I were exposed to foreign films and documentaries and then whatever his curiosity was at the time. And when you look back at his career path, he did Always for Pleasure in 1978.
Yeah.
He did Chulas Fronteras in 1976.
Sure.
He did Blues According to Lightning Hopkins in 67. I mean, these films are back to back, and they're as diverse as you can get. And that's what his mind, he was curious.
Sure.
And so when you hang out with a person who's a hedonistic, curious person, you generally have a pretty good time.
Are you referring to your dad or Werner Herzog?
I would actually, I would probably throw that at Werner as well. I wouldn't have minded, I mean, Werner's, he was doing similar things,
Absolutely.
crazy stuff that I admired. You know, I would have gone on any of those shoots as well.
Well, they're both anthropologists to a certain extent, very much so, and risk takers, and they both really, I think, believed in the medium of film as a way to, connect people.
And covering subjects that may be a bit obsessive and a bit curious themselves and passionate, and so there's all of this passion is in these films, and so Werner's as well, and hey, I'm just tickled to be part of this. I mean, we put together a really good team here to do this remastering, and I feel as if it's a part of Werner's legacy as much as Les's legacy in a lot of ways, because it really is about Werner, and it really captured the spirit of what it takes to make a film in the jungle like this. I mean, I thought Les did a really good job. Les and Maureen and the whole crew is. I just think it's beautiful, and we were talking about earlier what differentiates Les from other filmmakers that would have done this. This is Les Blank's stamp on Werner doing this film in the jungle.
Yeah.
The average filmmaker probably wouldn't have spent much time filming the ants and the beetles and the natives just staring, the indigenous people staring, and I mean, there's so much love in those shots of sort of like as if Les was from another planet looking at humans doing what they do.
Especially towards the end when we're really looking at the jungle and Werner's talking about his experience in the jungle, both in what we're seeing, the audio recording and the footage is miraculous. And that sort of, I think, brings us to Anthony and Nick and how you can maybe set it up, Herod, bringing them on, and then we can toss it to them in terms of, like you had mentioned, Anthony, at the top of the film, the importance of archiving and restoring work.
Well, to be honest with you, this film was not on Les's list after his death.
Okay.
So he left this big, huge list of the things that he wanted done if we could get to it. And Werner's brother, Lukey, reached out to me and asked if he could include Burden of Dreams on a box set of Werner's films in Germany. But he said, but Burden of Dreams is not quite to contemporary quality. The standards of it aren't good enough. And I was like, what? And so then we looked at it and we're like, yeah, it could be improved upon. So Anthony and I have already worked on 7 different films, remastering them. And so it wasn't on the list, but we decided that because there was already interest from Lukey, and we thought, you know what, we really should remaster Burden of Dreams.
Sure.
And that's when Anthony came on, and then just to introduce Nick on this too, Nick has been doing the audio on films, this is 7 films previous, and Nick got back to me and said, Harrod, we've got to get better elements. These elements are a copy of a copy of a copy.
Sure.
So then we had to go to the Academy, and I'll let Nick tell the whole journey of that, but I just want you to know that that's what makes this project so special is the audio. Nobody goes back to the Nagra tapes. And Nick he'll tell you, most people focus on the picture.
Mm-hmm. And all the money goes to picture.
And all the money goes to picture. But in this case, it's about the same. It's about the same amount of time and money went into the audio as well as the picture. And it is really amazing. So I'll just pass it on from there. But
well, a round of applause for Nick and his work. And truly, I've been in this business for 25 years, and you never see the kind of work put into audio and sound mix like this. You just don't. It's incredibly rare, and it's a shame. Take it away, Nick. Let's go to Nick.
You get away. Thank you for having me here. Yeah, so what you're listening to is actually kind of anti-sound restoration in a way, because I think a lot of people don't realize that we have very powerful tools these days to take away noise and distortion and wow and all these things. But any of those tools you use hurt the actual sound quality. So there's no way to really, you can always remove anomalies, but in the process of doing that, you always diminish the overall sound quality. And so the approach taken in this film is to essentially not try to fix those problems in the elements that we had, the copies and whatever, and go back to the elements before those anomalies were there. So there's very little in the way of noise reduction or anything like that, just because we went back to the early tapes where there was no noise, and so you don't have to use those kind of processing tools and that sort of thing. And so there were some big wow hits and distortion things in the original mix, and you can kind of mitigate those with current tools and such. But as soon as you go back to the original elements, the recordings were great, and they just weren't there at all. And so as soon as you go back that far, all that just kind of is gone. And so the challenge of this was really to find those original elements and then to recut them back into the film to match everything.
Wow. Basically, it's starting from scratch almost.
Yeah, but I don't, of course, want to change anything, and so the challenge is really to recut it and remix it, but follow the original exactly. So it's kind of like, with that guide, just following the original. Yeah.
But how does one do that when the original was a mono soundtrack, I'm guessing, and this is 5.1? What kind of decisions are you making in terms of that?
Yeah, so luckily we did have a DME, which is the original dialogue music effects separate.
Okay.
And so that was the baseline.
Mm-hmm.
And so of those elements, the dialogue music effects, the thing that is least problematic is the effects, and it's also the section that gets the most kind of editing and a manipulation during the mix. And so it's easiest just to kind of leave that alone. So most of the effects is original, that sort of thing. And then all of the music has been replaced with the original recordings of the music, same exact music and everything, but the original sources. And then most of the dialogue, maybe 90% of the dialogue has been replaced as well. So again, there was distortion and noise and all these sorts of things that happened. Because the Nagra tapes get copied to 16 mag, and then that gets cut up and edited, and that gets copied again, and then they went to 35, and that gets copied, and so all these generations and generations happen. But if you go back to the original, all these problems just kind of fade away. Yeah.
And my assumption is that the original tapes were preserved really well and kept really, really well over the last 40 years?
Well, that's the other interesting thing. So one of the big problems, as you guys know, is vinegar syndrome in film elements, and it's especially bad in audio elements because the iron oxide kind of accelerates the vinegar syndrome. And so there's many independent films on 16 millimeter where the master mag and the elements are in really poor shape. They're just barely usable. But luckily, the Nagra tapes don't have that problem. So even when the secondary transfer is in really poor shape, all the originals are in great shape still. So that's the other thing. So again, we really, instead of spending the time dealing with these vinegar elements and dealing with taking out these anomalies, we just spent that time on essentially finding the originals and putting them back into the film. And I should also say about the 5.1, genuinely I'm not someone who pushes for mono to go to 5.1, except for certain examples, and this is a really good one, where most of the original music in this film is stereo. And it only became mono because it was a mono-optical release. And the way it was recorded, especially the orchestral stuff, it was a wide stereo microphone recording. And when you sum that to mono, it starts to eat on itself and really do dramatically poor things with the sound quality. And so it really wants to be in stereo, and to put it back into mono we started that way, and when you A/B them, it's just such a dramatic difference.
I just want to comment on what a joy it's been for me to hear it, because it's sort of like what lesson I would have dreamed of doing from the start. And it was the first film I ever laid soundtracks out for, and I didn't know what I was doing. And I mean, usually you take weeks to get your soundtrack, in 16 millimeter, you would retransfer everything so that you'd get rid of all the splices, and there's lots of things you could do to prepare it, and I did 4 days or something. And Mark Berger, the original sound mixer, totally saved our butt on this. I mean, he used the tools that he had. He, mixed films like Apocalypse Now and Francis Ford Coppola's films, and so he knew the tools of the time, and so he really helped us a lot. But we were very limited, and we were stuck with the mono 16 millimeter track. So this has been a real joy for me.
Anthony, this is your 8th Less Blank project now with Herod and with Nick. Anything about this catalog of films that's different from your other work, and that are things you're learning in this process?
Well, we've been working on these films for a few years now, since his father passed away, and the big part was just trying to get the costs down so that we could do this amount of work. Mm-hmm. So we've created this really lean kind of remastering machine where I do a lot of the work manually. Normally, if you're going to do a studio film, you get 100 people in some foreign country to do all the dirt cleanup, but I just did it on weekends and listened to audiobooks and podcasts and spent a lot of time cleaning it up over time, and so we just took more time to do it.
Right.
2 years.
Well, when less money means more time.
Yeah. And but the results are there. You can make the films look really great, and the goal is just to do as much work you can today to make it look as good as possible, so that in the future you have a good master that everyone can reference for a long time. And I think a lot of filmmakers don't do this when they're alive. And talking to his father before he passed away, most filmmakers are focused on making a new film. They don't want to go backwards. Mm-hmm. And very few of them do. And I'd like to give a shout out to my film professor, Manny Kirchheimer, who just passed away.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And I got to work with Manny, and Manny was one of the few filmmakers I've worked with who while he was alive, took the time to actually remaster his own films. But most of them focus on going forward, and they're like, oh wait, how much is it going to cost? I can make another movie with that. So they never do it, and then they kind of leave this mess, and it just doesn't really get resolved. But we were talking about this before, because I've worked with Herod on a couple of his films, and I said, we really got to get your dad's films in good shape so that people can see them, And I had this conversation with him before he died, and I was like, look, your movies are going to play for a long time, beyond my lifetime, and we got to make sure that they exist, for 500 years. And his eyes just got really wide. He's like, I'm wearing one of his shirts right now. It says, "Art is long." It's this quote he really liked. Life is difficult, or experience is difficult. Life is short. Art is long.
Yeah.
And in order for that art to be long, you have to do this work. Yeah. And it's and Seven Samurai, all these movies, it's a lot of effort to kind of keep them going, because it's a fragile medium. It falls apart. You can see the scene when the boat's getting pulled up. That film is just falling apart. There's nothing really there to restore. And you have to kind of do these steps to kind of preserve them. So it's, that, I think on this film we've just gone a little bit farther, and we continue to kind of push the envelope of what you can do with a certain budget to make the film look as good as possible. And that's kind of what we've been refining over the years.
But the scary thing is how long is the work that we just did gonna last? Yeah, and what they have now, it's called LTO7 or LTO8 or LTO9 tape and hard drives.
Yeah.
And that's what we're left with. And the question is, well, how long will those last? And we're trying to do a clean version that has no color correction in case in the future, 20 years from now, they have a different, better tools for doing a better master or whatever. We're doing that, but I don't know if it's going to last long enough. It's just a big question. But I do know this, that when Les died, he hadn't gone to make the films HD. They were all standard definition. They were all transferred in the 70s and 80s to videotape, 1-inch masters. Some of them were digibeta masters. But, he just didn't, like Anthony said, he didn't want to spend the time to do that. He wanted to make more films. So he's just lucky that he trained me how to work on films, and that I give a damn, because there's few people that can do this these days, the transition from film to digital.
Yeah, most people don't realize the fragility of this medium. It's, unlike an oil painting. And as you said, Nick, the more technology changes and gets better, there's all this reduction from the originals. I want to kick it to the audience, but I want to talk a little bit about the release, because I found this really fascinating. Both correct me if I'm wrong, both Burden of Dreams and Fitzcarraldo premiered at the same time at Cannes in 1982, which to me seems really odd that a making of premieres at the same time. But even more bizarre, there was a television version released that summer in June, and then Burden of Dreams, the theatrical, was released around the corner at the Waverly, now the IFC Center, in September, before the New York Film Festival release of Fitzcarraldo, and then the theatrical release at the Paris. So this was released first, and I wonder how this affected Fitzcarraldo and its legacy, because these, especially in my brain, and like the mythology of cinema, these two films are so connected, and now I know why. But can you talk a little bit about the release and perhaps how Burden of Dreams affected Fitzcarraldo?
I don't know. I really don't know. We were so involved with getting Burden of Dreams out there, we weren't really sort of following the trajectory of Fitzcarraldo. It was very exciting. It was a whole year of it being a theatrical film, which was, we hadn't really done that before. And mostly, I think Les was doing it himself. There were, I think Sony Pictures and some of the bigger studios were interested in releasing it, but Les figured out that he wouldn't make any money if he let somebody else do it. And he said, these guys would take, first class plane tickets. I'm not gonna take first class plane tickets. I'm gonna, go and coach. And so I'm not gonna spend that kind of money. And so I think mostly it was done himself. And it played in about 100 theaters in a year, including, and it played anywhere from 1 day to 12 weeks. It played in San Francisco for 7 weeks or 12 weeks, the Surf Theater, and in those days, $70,000 was a big amount of money, and so it made money, and
Still
so
is.
yeah. Anyway, so Les was enjoying that very much, and we got tons of press. It was so exciting to every other day get new, some new review in some other country or whatever, and we've got all of them in file folders at Flower Films, Les Plant Films, and it's really cool that more physical, you can actually look at them and hold them in your hand. They're not just, online. And so it was a thrilling period. And yeah.
70,000 is, just to give you guys a sense of a single screen running an independent film in 2024 dollars, $70,000 is an astonishing week. We typically, a big blockbuster for us is 30 or 35,000 in a weekend.
This
of
was
2024 dollars.
This was 12 weeks.
Oh,
Total
okay. All right.
70,000.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, 40 years of inflation.
Yes.
But Argo Films, the distributor on this, has already lined up about 20 markets for this film, so the restoration will live on perhaps for a year.
Yeah,
Nationwide.
no, it's
Well,
fabulous.
2026 when it goes in criteria.
Yeah, right.
Only in theaters.
We do want to say that ultimately it will be re-released by Criterion in 2026.
Right.
Correct.
The full version, the 4K version, so it'll be on Blu-ray, etc.
Let's get some questions from all of you. We only take good questions in the form of questions.
So I've been noticing things with movies where scenes that people probably didn't laugh at when they first came out, now people are laughing harder, like the movie Psycho, I noticed that with. So are people laughing harder over the years at the speech of despair? Because I think that'd be interesting.
I think so.
Okay.
And I think part of it is because Werner has become such a
Oh, okay.
phenomenon
Yeah.
all by himself. I mean, he's got this cult following. In the master classes he's taught, has so many people that have, taken his master classes, and he's really been out in the public, and he's played these funny roles, and his voice is, people imitate his voice and do YouTube videos, and so even if you're not listening to yes, the content for sure seems really outrageous, but also just the way that he says it with his very distinctive German accent. And so, I've definitely, this crowd, these two nights have much bigger laughs than in the earlier version.
That's fascinating. Yeah.
I sat next to you when we watched Fitzcarraldo this afternoon, and it was quite interesting listening to you chuckle and giggle and the scenes that you were in, or that you shot. At the end of Burden of Dreams, Les is asking Werner basically why he makes films. How do you think Les would answer that?
Why does he make films?
Yeah, why does Les make films?
Well, once he learned how to do it, I think that he originally wanted to be a Hollywood director, and he was writing scripts in his, when he was in sort of just graduated from college and stuff, and he wasn't having any luck, but I think he always dreamed about being a big director, and so even though he started to do these documentaries about musicians and so forth, in the end he wanted to have some kind of a big splash of something, but he did love doing these films about music and culture for sure, and food. What more can you say about it, Harry?
I could say that it's who he was. I mean, a bird sings in the tree because the bird sings, right? I mean, this is his voice. He honed this way of seeing the world. He self-taught himself what he wanted to see and capture, and so when he turns the camera on things that he wants to show, that he wants to see that, and he wants to share that. And so it's just like what Werner says at the end, I've learned to do this. It's what I do. And that's what Les would say, and I would say that about you as well. What I know about you. It's what you do. And it's the beauty in that, because it's who you are. And it's who Les was. And that's all he has to do is chirp like a bird, and it comes out.
Thank you.
We have a question right here.
Oh, hi.
Right here, sir.
Hi.
Right.
I would just add to it, having known Les very well over the years, it was his way of making connection to humanity. It was his way of reaching out to people and loving through the camera. Couple of questions quickly. Okay, Howard, I was very surprised by what you said about Les not, excuse me, not considering this among the films he wanted to preserve. And I was wondering if that was because of technical issues or something else. Because particularly with this wonderful restoration, I see this as his masterpiece, really. And it's probably among the top 10 documentaries of the second half of the 20th century. It's a great, great film.
The reason for that, Larry, is that Criterion remastered the film in 2005, I believe it was. So Les already felt that they had done it to a certain extent and had done justice to the film. It looked pretty good. It wasn't 4K. It wasn't HD. It was SD. So he had other things that were more important, like Leon Russell. He thought that the Leon Russell film, A Poem as a Naked Person, was his masterpiece.
Oh yeah.
He really did. And so I think Burden of Dreams is more popular and has more longevity perhaps than his other films, but that's really why it wasn't high on the list. It had already been done to a certain extent.
Maureen, the music is wonderful. And I'm just curious to know how you went, in the editing room, if you remember, how you went about choosing the various bites and takes of music and inserting them almost magically in just the right place.
Well, that was one thing that was valuable by being on the scene, you know, being the sound recordist and the editor, because one of the things that I realized when I was there was Werner was listening to chorale music all the time on his cassette recorder, and I thought, that could be Werner's theme music. Aha! And then of course there's Caruso. That's another element that has to be there. And I had noticed, and with other films I'd worked on, how expressive music is of cultures, and there were all these cultures that were working together, living together, working on this project, and one way to show the differences and the contrasts was by their music. And the fact that we got to actually record the native people singing and their music, and then there was the Peruvian music because there were Peruvians working on the project. So it was this really rich resource to be able to provide the cultural interweavings of all these different people working together. And so it was really fun. And like that, finding that there was a Peruvian song about a canoe, you know, that I just, it was perfect over the, you know, the easy canoeing down the river next to this ship that was stuck, you know, and the native people just, you know, blithely going down the river in their nice little canoe, and these Germans and people working so hard with this big lumbering ship.
Another question right here.
Hi, it's an honor to see this legendary film with the co-filmmaker here. We've been talking a lot about the men behind this film, and I wanted to know, what was it like for you in such a male-dominated environment with so much ego and genius? What was your relationship with the indigenous women? How did you feel about the recognition that you've gotten since the film has been made? And anything else you care to share?
Well, it was definitely something that was pretty obvious. There were, I think I was counting, there were like 7 of us women. There was the costume designer, there was the script woman, Anya, there was the sound recordist and her husband. I mean, one of the sound recordists of Fitzcarraldo was a woman from Brazil, which I thought was fantastic. And then Walter Saxer's wife, Gloria, was the one that she was cooking everything, and she was, you know, sort of overseeing the women washing the clothes, and one of the things that I realized in editing was such a male scene that I thought of having a female narrator might be a good idea to just have provide a little balance. But being there and sort of well, there's a lot to talk about. I mean, being hit on sometimes, and also feeling. One of my embarrassing moments was I just knew something like this was going to happen, and I just read about it in my journal that there was one of those big scenes with with the Indians on the molinetas and the full cast and crew basically, and I was sent up the hill to get with the Bell and Howell to get a shot of what was going on up there for the documentary, and Werner could see me. He said, "Maureen, get down, get out of the way, you're in the shot." I was like, oh shit. And I just felt like, this blonde girl sticking out, in this scene of all these people, and I just was mortified, and I just snuck back down the hill. Yeah, anyway, there's a lot to say about that, but I mean, there's a lot to say about it. I was able to go on this incredible tour with Les to Latin America. We showed the film in 10 different Latin American countries, and along with some of the other films sponsored by the United States Information Agency. And I really appreciate it. I mean, I kind of, had to discuss with Les about, I need to go too, of course. And so he agreed, and we did have this incredible time. And so, I think he really gained appreciation for me in this film, which I appreciate so much too. And I just do regard it as this incredible collaboration, and so much joy came out of the creative part of it.
One final question now, folks, and then I encourage everyone, we're going to go to the very front of the lobby, and you can all talk to our guests out there.
Hi, thank you for this wonderful, visceral, and immersive experience. It's quite something to see it on the big screen. My question is for Herod. I was just wondering about your own films. What key takeaway would you say your father left you with in your own filmmaking? If you learned anything from Les, what would you carry with you in your own filmmaking?
Oh, sort of like what I was talking about earlier with what do you want to see and what do you want to share and convey, with what you do. Interestingly enough, we were talking to the curator and programmer of the PFA BAM in Berkeley about maybe doing a series of films by the so-called flowers of flower films, the people that Les influenced, and show their movies and do like a little retrospective of the other people, because Les really did leave a mark on a lot of filmmakers, and he was very, very open to sharing his feedback, and that's what he would tell, I think, people is just, what do you want to see, and how do you want to share that, and that's what he told me to do, and that's what I try to use my eye, and he did teach a lot, way more than that, and the curiosity is the biggest thing, is just being curious about the world around us and shedding the light, sharing the light.
I'm going to conclude by echoing what the gentleman earlier said. I think this is one of the great documentaries ever made, and I think it's about one of the great narrative films ever made. So thank you, Maureen, for making this movie, and thanks to the three gentlemen up on the stage here for bringing it back to all of us.
Thank you.
And thank you guys for coming.
Thank you to these guys, fantastic team. Thank you. Thanks, Mel.